Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. My name is Rick Schumer, and we are going to be talking about Thor's first decade. This is one of my productivity sessions. I've been doing these throughout the virtual conferences. First, I did builders, and now I did Intellisense after that. And this is really the third in the trio of sessions on increasing your productivity in Visual FoxPro. For those who don't know me, I'm president of White Light Computing. Christoph mentioned an interesting statistic earlier today about how many months he's been doing FoxPro development. So I had to look mine up. I have been doing FoxPro development for 383 months, which is an astounding number. I'm a partner at Forward Thinking Software. We create Clever Fox Backup, which is a really great product if you want to secure your customers' data to the cloud in a very simple, easy way. It also, not only does it do DBF, DBC, DBF-based data, it also backs up SQL Server data to the cloud. I'm obviously a partner at Geek Gatherings that does this conference and the Southwest Fox Conference. I received the Lifetime Achievement Award back in 2010, which is really hard to believe how long that's been. I'm a retired MVP, which is about the only time you'll see retired and Rick Schumer in a single sentence. I'm a VFPX administrator. I built a bunch of tools for you guys to look at and use. I've co-authored 7 books with some of the best people in our community, written over 100 articles. But the most important bullet on any of these slides is the last one on this one, which is my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions concerning this session or the conference or FoxPro in general. So today we're going to go in and look at Thor. Thor is a manager of all tools. It is much more than that, actually. It has become much more than that over the years. But what we're going to do is provide a deep dive into it, look at some of the tools, see how they're written, determine what you need to use, how to discover things within Thor, which I think is the most challenging part. And I'll do that through demos, and I'll do that through code examples. We'll start out kind of basic, and then we're going to go in much deeper. I'm not going to try to have your brains ooze out of your ears like you did with Christoph and Kevin's sessions, but we're going to have some fun, and hopefully by the end of this you'll be inspired, if you're not using Thor, to use it, if you're not writing tools in Thor, to write tools, and if you are willing to share those tools to the community if they're something you think is generic enough to share. So the road traveled is a long one. Thor was actually released 10 years ago, back in April of 2011. I received an email from Jim Nelson, the grandfather of Thor. Him and Doug and Matt Slay and a handful of others were involved in the design and development of Thor. And I will tell you flat out that when Thor was first the idea of Thor was first sent to me, I'm like, meh, whatever. I'm not getting why it was so important. It was like many other things. I need to really look at what it was all about. Microsoft is really the ultimate responsibility for this is Microsoft. And this is really a story that needs to be told. It's not something that's well known necessarily, but Microsoft introduced MenuHits in VFP9. MenuHits inspired Marsha Akins, also rest in peace, to develop the replacement dialog for the editor property method dialog. That particular dialog inspired Jim Nelson to develop the PEM editor, who then developed Thor based on his learning of what the PEM editor was doing for the community. He figured out that Thor needed to be developed from that. And there's a lot of cross-pollination between Thor and the PEM editor as far as design and code goes. So we actually have Microsoft to thank, even though Jim was responsible for and the others were responsible for doing the development. All right. So before Thor, I use a menu. In fact, this menu still exists. It hasn't been updated in years. But I used to use a menu, or I have a menu called my Geek menu that has all the tools on it that I use and either developed by myself or by others on my team or others in the community. I also had a toolbar that I used to instantiate, but that used to get destroyed every time I did a clear all, release all. And so that was kind of a pain in the neck. And so anyways, in the tools, I also use them from the command window, and I'd have to remember where in the command windows they were and all, or the folders that they were in and all that. So when Thor came out, it was kind of an eye opener that we could manage all of our tools in one little utility. So let's take a look at what Thor can do in action, just to give you an upfront. If you aren't familiar with it, we'll take a look at it and give you an idea of what's going on. So Thor, when you run Thor, you get two menus. You get the Thor menu, which has on it some Thor configurations. We'll go into that in a little bit. It also has a bunch of tools on it on the Thor tools menu. And that is where you will find the Thor repository tools that have been contributed by the community. So I'm just going to go in here. My whole session is driven off of Thor. So I'm using Thor to drive my session in Thor. So I'm just going to run Thor in action. Now this is a ugly program. I had to build this from scratch, but I will tell you that many of the things that are in this ugly program were inspired by some recent code that me and my team have worked with over the last, I don't know, let's just say 6 months or so. So we have some ugly code. It's not formatted well. It's got some errors in it. It has some performance issues in it. And I'm just going to go through Thor and quickly just try to mop up this program as quickly as I can. So I have this a missing N4 here. And so I'm going to run one of the Thor tools that is designed to close control structures. And if I do, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Wrong keystrokes. I click, or I hit a keystroke that I have a shortcut for called the close control structures. That's off the menu on Thor. We'll see those in a minute. So that's one thing. The highlight control structures isn't handy. You've got a whole bunch of nested ifs and case statements here. So if I'm on this line, this message box line, and I come up here and I go to Thor code, oops, highlight text, no, highlight control structures, it will actually find the whole if then else, or the do case, or the for loops, or the do while loops, and so on. Really handy when you have a lot of nested control structures within your program. Replace statements. In this case, we have a bunch of replace statements. I see this a lot in some of the FoxPro DOS code that we have maintained, where people do replace statements, one replace at a time. Well, that's 5 updates. That makes no sense to do. We all know that doing one update is going to be faster and more efficient. So if you come into code and you go to highlight text and you come down here, you can combine replace statements. Now remember, all these utilities, everything that you see on this menu was developed by somebody else and is included in the Thor repository. So it builds this little routine, or it has this little UI so that I can enter in the alias that I wanted to associate with this replace. Once I apply it, it puts in, it replaces all the replaces with just the one line. So we can see here also above that I don't have any locals declared. I have a bunch of local variables. That's nice, but it'd be really cool, and I don't want to have to type all this out. If I do Control A and Control F6, my shortcut for the create locals function, it actually goes through the entire highlighted code and determines all your locals that are needing to be declared. Okay, and it separates out some of the COM declarations as well from the create objects. So that's almost how I basically do that throughout new code. When I'm developing a new program, I will just not do my declares until I'm done, and I just have Thor help me out. MDOTs. So if I highlight this loop here, you can see that there's some local variables that are not MDOTed. If you're an MDOT fan, if you believe that MDOTs are important or not, depends on how you believe, you can add MDOTs to the code without having to go tracing through all your code and finding all your local variables. I definitely use MDOTs in my Thor tools and anything that works with data. It's something that either you like or don't like. You can also un-MDOT the variables if you like. Thor has a tool for that. One of the things that will guarantee you a random C5 error is to put a replace statement within a with end with structure. So if we go back up to Thor here, go to code, go to with end with, there's actually a Thor tool that will determine if there are any returns within those structures. Once you do that, you can show it, and it will, within this with end with here, I have a return. That is going to guarantee that at some point after this code is executed, that your code will C5. So this is just helping you get rid of those. Okay, all the code is really ugly, as I mentioned. I'm just going to do Control A. Thor has a tool called Beautify X. Works very similarly to Beautify, but is extensible and it's got more capabilities in it. It's not perfect, but it does do a nice job. It will also run the with end with if you have that option shown or selected in the options, and we'll go over that in a little bit as well. So now you can see that my cases, my indented ifs and all that are nicely much more readable. One of the neat things that and Doug and I were just talking about this before the start of the session, those who have moved into other technologies such as .NET get used to some of the cool things in .NET that you don't have in Visual FoxPro, one of which is called go-to definition. Matt Slay was doing some .NET work at one point. I remember him doing this specifically, and he wanted somebody to come up with a go-to definition in Visual FoxPro. Jim Nelson, as was so often the case, ran with Matt's idea and created a go-to definition. I have it tied to my F12. So when I'm on this create object line right here, when I'm on that create object and I hit F12, it will go to that class definition. That works within this PRG. It also works within the scope of your project. So if you have a class in a VCX somewhere in another folder within your project, it will actually go search and find that and open it up for you. Super helpful when you're trying to do that. And if you don't have that defined, it will actually give you the opportunity to create it. And then some other quick things. If I make sure I have a table open. In Thor, we also have some options for tables. One of my favorite is Super Browse, which gives you the ability to go through and look at your thing, your table or your cursor, just as if you were doing a regular native FoxPro browse. But this one gives you the ability to go through and pick certain columns. And when you do that, you can go to the picker page. It gives you your select statements, or you can create update statements or insert statements. And you can just copy and paste this code right into your programs. It also will go to SQL exec code as well from the FoxPro code. All very super helpful. I use this whenever I'm trying to pick and choose fields for my select statements on a regular basis. The other one I really like when I'm working with DBF cursors is the schema. Tables, there's the schema, and that will create a HTML of the basically list structure, but it gives you more information and it gives you something in a rich text environment versus the dump to the screen that you get or to a text file. So that's really just a quick review of Thor in action. That's the idea of Thor, is that it just manages a bunch of tools that you can quickly use day-to-day doing development with Visual FoxPro. Any questions at this point?
No questions so far.
Okay. Keep them stunned, keep them off guard. That's what I always say. So let's jump into the Thor Foundation. So we're going to run a poll. Over in the next to the chat window is a tab for polls. I'm kind of curious where people are with using Thor, just so that for the rest of the session I can sort of get an idea of what's going on as far as knowledge of Thor, so I don't cover certain topics. So let's, while you guys are doing that, why can't I see that poll? Oh, here it is. Yeah, I got it. All right. I'm going to, while you guys are answering that poll, I'm going to jump into the Thor Foundation. So again, Thor is a central tool for managing all your FoxPro IDE processes, add-ons, tools. It also has a ton of tools that are already pre-built for you in the Thor repository. It also has a framework of code to help you build tools in addition from scratch. And it helps you build them faster, and we'll see examples of that. And then there's a way to manage updates from different VFPX projects. And I'm going to talk about that in a way that we need some help. All right, I am going to see if I got the poll results. So we've got more people new to Thor than I expected. That's cool. I'm glad I went over Thor a little bit with the example then. And a lot of people using the tools, and then it trails down. So that's good. That's kind of what I was sort of expecting. I was not expecting as many people to be new to Thor, but that's fine. New to Thor gives you the opportunity to take a look at what this is all about. So Thor is available on VFPX. We'll bring that right up over here. Bring that on the screen for you. It is a VFPX project on GitHub. You can download the code using this green button right here, either through pulling the repository or getting a zip file. The installation is fairly straightforward. You just put in a folder. I move my folder from my Thor folder from machine to machine. I don't reinstall it because it keeps all the Thor tools that I've created where it goes. So the Thor project has the Thor folder, and then there's the source code under the Thor folder, and then there's procedures, Thor programs, and source programs for Thor are all under the source. Then there's some metadata tables that drive different aspects of Thor. Those are all detailed in the white paper. Because of time, I'm not going to be able to go through that. So take a look at the white paper to get more details about the metadata if you're interested. And then under that are tools. And this is where you're going to find the various apps like the Project Explorer, Fox Unit, Go Fish. Those kind of apps are under the apps. And then you're going to have components, or different components that you can use in Thor. Images. My tools is where your code's going to be. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And then just some general procedures, samples, and then the updates from VFPX are managed under the updates folder. Anyways, again, Thor created by Jim Nelson, Matt Slay, Doug Hennig, and others. All right, how do we create tools? Because if we're going to do things, we might as well just jump in and learn how to create a tool right off the bat. So go right to Fox. So Thor, under Thor is the configuration screen. And this is where you manage everything about Thor. You can do menu definitions, which we're not going to talk a lot about, but you can actually add things to the VFP system menu. We'll talk about key chords in a little bit. You can manage your hotkeys, which are all the shortcuts. We'll show you how to manage those in a second. You can determine if you want different programs from your repository, the Thor repository, or your own code to run when you start up Thor. And we'll talk about options later as well. The tool definitions is where the meat of Thor is. This is where all the repository tools are created, as well as your own. You can add your own tools. Everything that's in yellow highlight here are tools that I've added over the years. And you can see that I just have a whole bunch that I use on a regular basis. To create a tool, let's just create this tool button right at the bottom. That brings up a quick dialog. It asks you which folder you want your Thor tool to put in. My recommendation is to leave it in My Tools. You can put it in other locations. I haven't done that. You name your tool whatever you want. We'll just call this one the Thor tool BFF. It's not going to do anything in particular, just an example of how you create it. You can also pick from templates. We'll talk about templates in a little bit. Hit the create button. It opens up a PRG. Okay. I will open up one that's already cooked. And that is this example. There's two sections to every Thor tool. The top section is the registration code. Every time Thor starts, it runs every program in your My Tools folder, as well as other folders, to register the various components, applications, and Thor tools that you've created. When it does that, it passes in a parameter that's an object. That object is the registration object that Thor uses internally to understand what your tool or other tools that you've downloaded are all about. So that once that parameter is passed in, it runs this registration code. You set up your prompt. The prompt is going to be what shows up on your menu. You put in status bar text. That's what shows up on the menu status bar text. As you're going through the menu, that'll show up on the status bar. The description is going to show up on the Thor dialog. I'll show that in a little bit. And then the other important part, minimally, that you want to run is to categorize it. This category shows up on the Thor menu as the category, the menu option level above where your tool is going to be. In this case, I got the DBF with CM repair, and that's what this tool is. It's running off my third-party tools. You can sort the menu if you want. If you don't, it puts it in alphabetical order. Below that is the version, the author, a link if you want to put a link where the download's available, and so on. That code runs every time Thor starts, or every time you refresh Thor, which we'll show in a little bit. If it doesn't, if you pick the menu option, Thor runs this program again, but it doesn't pass in the parameter. So it skips the registration code and goes right to running the tool code procedure. In this procedure, all I did was hard code where my path is. This is a very simple example. Hard coded path to run the CM repair app, so that it passes in the current directory, so that I can start up the repair tool to repair the data that I have to work with. Unfortunately, I have to do that far too many times. Okay, so that's it. That's the two sections: tool code at the bottom, registration code at the top. Here's another example, same pattern. And why is it the same pattern? Well, that's when we're going to get the templates. You'll see why. So I have my code here. In this case, it's going to run the white light computing view editor. This code is a little more complex because I'm using the registry. I'm reading the registry to find out where the view editor is installed. Here's the key. I go out and instantiate the Fox Foundation class registry tool. I get the key, I read the key, and I then run the tool based on where it's found. If it can't find it, it just tells you to go register it. But all the code that you do in your tool code, in the process that's going to run your tool code, is VFP code. So anything you want to run, you can literally run. If you want to run a process that generates a report, you can do that. If you want to run a form to do some data entry, you can do that. If you want to just run a process that generates HTML that you're going to post somewhere, you can do that. All of these things I'm doing. You can even run a form that has WPF on controls on it and use WPF through this. Or you can run multi-threaded code using Christoph, his DLL, just like Kevin demonstrated last time. So this is code that is just going to be very common to you. Okay. All right. Once you add, there's a couple of caveats to this. Once you add a new tool, it may not show up in your in the tree view here. You have to use this button over here in the upper right corner to refresh your tool list, so that it will do that if you needed to see that. Once you're done working with the tool, though, you can just close this. Thor will rerun all the tools again. It will recreate this toolbar. By the way, this Thor toolbar is generated from Thor as well. So you have menus, toolbars, you have launcher tools that will give you the ability to launch various tools that you have favorited or searched or filtered within the Thor lists. It's so many different ways you can run stuff. All right, any questions on creating tools?
Just one, although it's not related to creating tools, but is CM Repair a public domain, or where can I get it?
CM Repair is a commercial third-party repair tool, and you can just Google it. I don't. A Comp Motor, I think, is the company that does that.
That's it.
All right. So once you create the tool, it's going to bring all the properties that you have in the registration will show up on the Thor configuration screen. Your category and your prompt are obvious, but here's where the author, the version, your link to the tool homepage, a video link if you have a short video, the description, all that shows up in the list. For your own stuff, you may all know that, but when you're looking at Thor Repository tools, or if someone else is using your tools, it's really nice to provide this information so it becomes obvious when they're going through it. A couple of tips on writing code: wrap all your tool code in a try-catch. You don't want your code erroring out, triggering things that are difficult to track down, especially if you're sharing your code. You want to make sure your code doesn't crash FoxPro or give other developers heartburn. You want to make sure, like any program, this is not something new, but you want to take control of your sets in your environment, and you want to clean up on your way out. You want to make sure that if you open tables, that you close cursors, that if you set deleted on, you set deleted off, or whatever, you reverse that. I recommend MDots for any tools that you create in Thor, just so that you don't possibly conflict with maybe the Thor metadata, or if you're working with cursors in your own code, that you don't run into the MDots getting overridden by the cursor columns. All your it's all Visual FoxPro code. Anything you can do in Visual FoxPro, you can do in Thor. I mentioned this already with the Thor refresh button. Not going to talk about that again. Testing. When I tested code, when I first started working with Thor, this is kind of what I did. I opened Thor, I opened the configuration, I went into the tool definitions, I went and found, let's go find that CM repair. I would come in here, I would edit the tool, I'd work with the tool, I'd close this, I'd close Thor, I would then go to my menu and I would run the menu option, I'd find the bug or step into a problem, and I'd come back here and do the same thing over and over and over. I want to make sure that you understand this trick because this saves tons of time. You don't have to go through close Thor and everything. This is just a PRG that's sitting in the development environment. You are able to run this with no problems at all. And it can run right now without running Thor. So if I run it, it brings up the CM repair utility. Okay. I close it, I can run it again. I mean, this is just a standard program. And because I'm not passing in that Thor object parameter, it's just running my tool code. Very easy to do. Okay. So that is how I test. I write the programs, I test it, then I close Thor and it shows up on my menu or my toolbar. Oh, by the way, if you want something to be on your toolbar, there's for each one of the tools, you have right in the right panel at the top, you have a toolbar checkbox. It shows up on your toolbar. You can run a caption, a picture, or the default Thor icon. And now you can see that I now have CM repair on my toolbar. You can also assign it hotkeys for things that I want to run all the time. I have hotkeys assigned to it, but I will warn you that remembering all your hotkeys is going to be a challenge, especially when you have dozens and dozens of tools set up. All right, Thor templates. This is where you get to implement. Thor comes with its own template. It has one default template, so you don't have to create your own if you don't want one. If you want to just use the default one, you can do that. I implemented my own template at first because I wanted to implement my own coding standard. Jim's standards for coding and my coding standards are different, and I wanted my template code to perpetuate throughout the rest of my tools. So I just wanted to implement my own standard. That's what I started for. But then I realized that there are other things that I do that are different. So I create a template for my regular procedure code. Then I create a template with object-based tool code. As I created different sessions, I created different templates for different sessions so that when I created new examples or demos, it created a new one, it followed the same standards. So let me just show you the templates I have, or at least the ones that I've shared with you guys on our Thor repository. All right, so this is my most common one I use 90% of the time. All I have to do is come in here and fill out the prompt. My status bar text, I have my status bar text reflect into my description. So that code's all set up. All my tools go under WLC. So you'll see that majority of tools are right here under the WLC menu. I do change that depending on if I have a tool from somebody else or I'm tracking it based on third-party tools or whatever. All my tools are in this GitHub repository under our Schumer/Thor tools. So any tools that are generic and we're sharing, I've shared. There are some tools that I've not shared, but they're very custom to things like running invoices for one of our commercial third-party tool, our third-party vertical market apps. I didn't release that. So in this case, I set up my basic all the time code that I use within my different Thor tools. I always have a try catch. I have some messages displayed and so on. The object class is the same thing at the top for the registration code, but instead, oops, I went a little too far. I create that object, I do the main method of it, and then I release the object. And then the code below is just a defined class library. And all my code here will go in my do method. Southwest Fox, I have a Southwest Fox menu option for the tools that I use for Southwest Fox to set up various things and provide details like the statistics on the first slide this morning that showed how many countries and stuff like that. All that stuff's automated with programs, and I do that through Thor. So I just have a Southwest category, and down below is just the logic to do that for the base logic. And then I have a basic template that really has nothing in the tool code if I want to start from total scratch. Okay, any questions on any of the most recent stuff?
No questions.
All right, great. All right, so now let's get into some of the innards. The Thor Framework. The Thor Framework is some code examples that's provided by Thor. It's got some logic that you may want to incorporate in your tools. It shows you internally how you can call things in Thor, and how you can get references to the Thor engine, which is some core code in the Thor engine that you can use. It's easiest to explain by just showing you guys. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. It's next. So the Thor framework is documented, as is a lot of stuff in Thor. Jim Nelson created a lot of documentation. Probably others that were involved in creating that documentation. Thor from Norway was kind enough to migrate all the documentation from Codeplex before it was shut down over to the GitHub repository. But anyways, the Thor framework is just one of the docs on the GitHub repository that will give you some of the information that you need to work with the framework. In this case, this is just the framework tools to make tools. There's documentation on the form settings object, which I'm going to show as an example. And then there's the context menu as well, all documented to show you how to use Thor's framework code internally. And then just as a reminder, Codeplex is closed, and you will sometimes find that you will be forwarded to Codeplex when you go into Thor and ask for selecting some of the menu options. There's still stuff in Thor that points to Codeplex, which is something I'll ask about at the end of the session to hopefully get people inspired to help us out with that. All right. Okay, so this is, for those who watched my Intellisense session from the May Virtual Fox Fest, you may be familiar with the Hack Intellisense tool that is part of Thor, that was released with Thor in the Thor repository. The Thor or the Hack Intellisense tool works without Thor. It's a standalone tool, but if you use Thor, it knows that you're using Thor. You have Thor installed and running. And so what it's going to do is, if it sees that Thor is installed, it's going to go through what's known as its persisted properties. So things like the form position and some of the various UI elements will get pre-filled in with the way it was the last time you used this tool. So the properties that are assigned to this are defined up here in some text end text. It puts some carriage return between each one. And then it instantiates the settings object in Thor, first by declaring it locally. This IntelliSense won't work because it's looking for Jim Nelson's folder structure, but that's okay. But that's only IntelliSense. That doesn't matter. So what's the key part here is it runs the exec script through the Thor Dispatcher. The Thor Dispatcher is created on the _ screen object within FoxPro when you first run Thor, so it's always available. And by the way, Thor is smart enough to persist itself even through a release all clear all. Okay. So to the Thor Dispatcher, this time we want the form settings, the Thor form settings class, and we're going to use it to get the settings for Hack Intellisense. And then it calls the settings to object to restore the persisted properties. And then from there, Jim's filling in the sort order, the search filter criteria, and then runs the set filter method so that the IntelliSense things that match the IntelliSense entries that match your filter criteria are automatically presented on the screen when the screen first starts. And that's what this code's all about. All using Thor's framework, all the code within Thor. Everything you see there is Thor code. In addition, there is the engine. And the Thor engine is an object within Thor. You can get an object reference to it using the exec script through the Thor Dispatcher, calling the Thor engine. That will return to you an object. From there, you can look at things like the Thor folder, which everyone has probably installed in a different folder structure. Really important if you're counting on that folder when you're looking at the or using it within your code. You got the tables folder, which is where the metadata folder is created. You have the tools folder, which is where your tools are installed. And you have things like finding a file. Maybe you don't know where a particular file is. In this case, I have a HackCX MRUs program that's part of the Thor repository, but I don't know exactly where that's installed. This will tell you. In fact, let's just run this program so you can see the results. So here you can see that it's installed in my project folder under VFPX, under Thor, under tools, and then in those tools folders where that PRG is installed. Where is or I have an option for a particular tool that I created called log file name. What is that set to? Well, it's currently set to C:temp / WLC project statistics output txt. So you can not only find options, you can get options, you can set options programmatically within your own Thor tools. Okay. The Thor version, this one is not very useful. It always returns 0.4. I'm not sure why, but that's the way it is in Thor. The real version number is going through the Thor Dispatcher and getting the version, and that shows you version 1.42.13, June 18th, 2016. And then you can also open tables. The reason I set up Thor in my local statement up here with the engine, very similar to why Jim had it in that code in the Intellisense hacking tool, is it then enables Intellisense within that Thor engine. This is how I go through the discover process to find out what's in the Thor engine. It is documented, but it's easy to find out through Intellisense how to do that. Just as an example, you can not only use Thor's engine inside of your Thor tools, but you can also use it in your own code. This is my FoxPro startup program. And in the beginning of the FoxPro, in my startup program, I want to execute what I call the Intellisense Tip of the Day. The Intellisense Tip of the Day is something I wrote after my Intellisense session in May, because one of the biggest problems with Intellisense is learning what's available, what you created, what you may have from others in Intellisense. And I wanted something that would just display that. Well, I don't have, I created a tool for that. It's a Thor-based tool. It runs in Thor, but I also wanted to run the first part of the day when I start up Visual FoxPro. So I actually have the Thor Dispatcher tell me where the full path is to the Intellisense Tip of the Day program, execute the Thor Dispatcher to get that, and then you can do do that program that it returns to you. And what it runs is same thing that is on my toolbar, and that just pops up 3 different Intellisense tips so that I remember what to do or what to use as I remind myself of what's in my Intellisense script. All right, any questions about the engine or the framework?
No questions.
Okay. Maybe we got some brains oozing on that. That was a little intense as far as this session would go. All right, options. Options are more complicated. I'm just going to show you some code and an example, which will make it easier. So when you run Thor's configuration utility, when you run the Thor configuration utility, you'll find that there are options on the last tab. The options are set up for a number of repository-based or internal Thor utilities, but it doesn't have to be just that. I mean, in the case of Beautify X, for instance, this is probably one of the more complicated options dialogues. You can just see that there are, you can put, page frames on top of page frames, and you can just add a number of text boxes and combo boxes with settings. And I mean, it is just extensive for Beautify X, what you can turn on, turn off, how you want it to work, and so on. I'm not going to go through that example in code because it's a lot. But if I go to project statistics, this is a tool that I built just when we inherit various projects from other companies who are either retiring or are where developers moved on for whatever reason. So I need something. I just want to get a quick overall view of what is in that project, how many forms, how many reports, how many class libraries, and so on. So I want to quickly understand what the project has in it. So I have this utility that goes through, scrapes out that information for me. I can have that utility either put it into a text file or in a browse. And so that is the option. So check that on or off. I check it on for file because that's the way I like it. This text box here has the file name in it. I can do an ellipsis to open the get file dialog so I can get a different file if I want to put it there. For now, that's what I'm going to do. I also put this label here so that I can click on it and it will open it up and show me the statistics for that particular project, or the last one that I ran the statistic analysis on. Okay, so how is that built? Well, that is built right into the tool itself that you created. So here is the project statistics. At the top, we have the standard registration information. There is 2 additional new things that you haven't seen before. One is the name of the tool, which is the option tool, and then the option classes for each data entry element within or each setting through the data entry or UI for that. You have to have an option class. So to determine if I'm going to have the stats go to a file, I have, that checkbox goes through that. And for the file name, that's the other UI element, I have a class for that. To get to those classes, it's in this program. All the rest of this code you'll see down here is all the tool code. And down here you will see the actual classes. All right, so the class here is just a custom class. I create a base class first so that I could subclass for the stats file and the stats file name, which is the 2 that we just set up in the property and the registration code. The only reason I created a base class for this is I didn't want to have these 2 lines of code in each of these 2 classes individually. I'm just sort of shortening up the amount of code that I have to maintain. In the base class, you have to have the name of the tool and the container for the UI. In this case, I called it Project Stats Option Page. Okay. I have the two classes. Each of those need a key and a value pair. The key is what it's looked up in the table. This is stored in the metadata for Thor. So it's a key value storage for the various options. So you have to have the name of the key that it's looking up. It uses the tool name and the key, and the value here is the default value for the first time it's created. But once it's stored, it just brings in the value that's in the registry or in the metadata registry. And then the log file name. That's it for those classes. That's all that's needed for each UI element in your options. Then you have to define your container. This is the actual container that is displayed in that options page. Okay, and that's what you saw on the in the Thor configuration screen. You can go in and create this using a regular. You could create a VCX based container. You could create a PRG based container, and you could code in the UI elements using standard, FoxPro controls to drop in, or you can use dynamic forms. I'm a friend of I love dynamic forms for tools because I don't have to release additional classes. And I think that creating a container with a bunch of UI elements in code would be more complicated. So if you're not familiar with dynamic forms, it's not super complicated, but it would take a significant amount of this session to explain it. So I'm not going to get into the super details of the nitty-gritty of it, but if you have questions on it, you can ask me in the session after this or offline, or just take a look at it. It's a VFPX project. So first of all, you have to render the Thor Dispatcher to get the option render engine a reference to that. That's something that's necessary. And then the rest is the dynamic form code. All we're doing is we're creating what's known as body markup language. It's no different than creating XML or HTML type stuff. It's just markup language. It's really simple. .class in all these font name, font size are all FoxPro intrinsic properties. The settings are equal to what you want it to be. So the class is going to be a checkbox. It's going to have the Seago UI font name. It's going to be 9 points. The caption is going to be this caption. It's going to be that width. The tool name. This is two things that you have to have. What you're essentially binding to is the key and the tool name, and that's how Thor interprets it to store that pair into the metadata. So that's one class, one UI element. Then I created another label. That label is that what looks like a hyperlink to open that statistics file. I created a custom class to do that, a custom label or a created label class. Then the text box for the log file name, and then a button to go do the ellipsis to go search to open up and get the class or the file that you want. Once you do that, you render that container, and inside Thor, it recognizes that this is a dynamic form, and so it knows what it's going to do to render it. All the code below here in the example is just other classes for the command button and my custom label. So when Thor runs, it registers this in the options. It knows that we have a special option dialog for this tool. It renders it and then displays it in the Thor configuration when you select whichever option it is that or whichever tool you're working with, and the options that are associated with it. Okay, any questions on that?
No questions.
Right. I will tell you that that is probably the most complicated part of Thor. Over the years, I will say that I have done this only a handful of times. And it's really, I think, most important if you're going to release things to the community where you want to make it more flexible. A lot of the times you'll just see me make notes in the tool that says, hey, you may have to change this pound defined to something that's in your environment. Sometimes I will create pound defines for translation so that if you want to change this string to from English to German or English to Spanish or whatever it is, you can do that. It's just that sometimes it's easier to do it through options as well. Cool. All right, so Thor's hidden features. And when I say hidden, they're not really hidden. They're obvious, but if you don't know about them, you may not know what they're for and what they're useful to doing. Key chords is probably, if I know of anything in Thor that has sort of been off my radar or not used as frequently, and something that I get reminded of when I read my white paper that I'm preparing a session for, this is the one tool that I will tell you in Thor is something that I should be using far more than I am using. All right, so let's go into see how key chords are implemented in Thor under configuration. Under menu, again, you can maintain your menu, the VFP system menu, and you can add things, but that's not the key chords. The key chords are little pop-up menus. So if I am, let's just bring up a program real quick. So if I'm here in this code editor, and this could be method code editor or just program editor, I can right click and I get this context menu that's built into Visual FoxPro. But if I want, with key chords, I can actually pop up a menu with a shortcut key that in this case it was Control H for me for highlighting, because that's a lot of tools on this menu are for. But I can actually come in here and put some of the more common tools that I use in Thor. Much easier than going Thor code, control structure, highlight control structure. I can just do Control H, highlight control structure, and boom, there it is. There's my width and width control structure. Much faster, much easier to get to. And I tell you, out of the things that probably could boost my productivity that I don't use the most, this is probably one of those things. So I've, over the last few months, been trying to get myself to use this more and more. Again, going back to figuring out how we do it, pop-up menus are available. Here's the highlight text features that I have. Every one of these is a Thor tool that already pre-exists within the tool definitions page that we have here. Whether it's Thor Repository that comes with Thor, built into Thor, or ones that you create or others have created that you've dropped into your My Tools folder. Okay. Once you have that, let's just bring up the one that I added most recently. You can come in here once you, well, how do you add it? First of all, you click Add Tool. That brings up the dialog over here. I will just pick one, doesn't really matter. Once I pick it, it brings it onto the menu. It fills out, the prompt, the status bar text. It's getting that from the registration code at the top of the program for this. It brings in the folder, the description, the name, the version, all that, the tool homepage to click on. You can put it to a hotkey. If I want a hotkey, confuse it with something I already have. Let's see if I have one. Nope, that's probably one I already have. So anyways, you just basically press whatever key that you want. There's one. And it brings it in, it records it. If you're not happy with that, you can clear it out. And so it just becomes available, and your hotkeys show up on your menus just like they normally do in regular menus. You can add separators to put separator lines in to break up a menu just like you would any other menu. Once it's on the menu, you can just control whatever your shortcut is, and you can see that menu's already there. So super quick, easy to get to, and not hard to set up, especially once you have done all the hard work of creating the tool, or if you're using something constantly, it's easy to get to. I think this is also simpler than memorizing, which in my case, if we go to all the hotkey assignments, you can see that I have quite a few hotkey assignments for all the tools. So, yeah, I think that's what we have for key chords. Any questions?
Nope, no questions.
Okay, I'm going to be interested. Post in the chat. I would like to hear if anyone is using key chords. It's something that I'm I don't know if I'm late to the party or if it's something that it's just not commonly used. All right, let's go real world. All right, using Thor in IDE is great. It definitely improves productivity. It gives me a way to organize my tools and all that. But I wanted to figure out if it would work at runtime. Runtime doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily in the fact that I would expect my customers to be using tools that I use. But one of the things that we do is we produce or we support customers who are in production mode that don't have Visual FoxPro. And when they call for support, we sometimes wish we had FoxPro installed to be able to use things like what we have in Thor or just working with data on a regular basis. And that is something that we use a runtime development, runtime command window. And that runtime command window is probably very common to what you guys, whoever has one of these. There are ones that are available for download on various sites. But I actually incorporated not only Intellisense into our command window, but also enhancing with Thor. So you can already see when I ran their command window here that it has the same toolbar, the same Thor toolbar as I have on the my IDE, my regular FoxPro development. I can run my Intellisense tip of the day tool even on this enhancement in this command window. So the question really is what can you do with this? Well, in our case, one of the things that I do a lot of, well, not as much as I used to because it's getting much better, but is figuring out corruption in data. I have a data check utility that goes through, validates the database, and tells me which tables can be and cannot be opened, which tables have all their indexes, which tables, free tables outside of the DBC can be opened up and verified. I can bring their data back, but if I have this utility on their site, my support people can actually run this and tell me if there's corruption that we have to do repairs on. So those kinds of things, integrity checking, memo checking, these are things that you can do in a production environment that you can leverage in Thor. I can also go in and run my third-party data repair utilities as well, which is very handy when your customer is trying to run their operations and somehow they get a corrupt table. So this is just one little example of how you can use Thor even outside of your IDE. Obviously, you have feature not available errors, so you can't do things like, modify forms or build EXEs or, modify or build projects and creating forms and stuff like that. All that's documented in the white paper, but it's kind of handy to know that you absolutely positively can use Thor even in production apps if it makes sense. Okay, on the Thor repository, I have on my personal GitHub repository, not the Thor repository, but my personal GitHub repository, I've released a bunch of tools that you may find handy. I'll run the check data in a minute. The check data integrity, Dave Hanna wrote some code years ago that I've been able to leverage into a Thor utility that goes through and sees if there's corruption within the data, within the indexes on a table. For whatever reason, Microsoft decided to implement, or maybe it was Fox Software, decided to implement a numeric overflow in DBFs where you can stick numbers in larger than the design of the column was meant to be. I go crazy whenever we run into one of these. It does happen occasionally. Finding the record with that particular numeric overflow is difficult. And so I wrote a utility that will go in and look at all numeric columns, not just numbers, but dollars and integers and so on that will, well, integers really don't overflow very often. But anyways, anything that's a numeric column, it checks. List project paths is a way to just see what paths are involved in a particular project. The Intellisense Discovery, which is the tool that I showed you at the tip of the day. The report scrubber to remove all the junk that occasionally gets stored in the first record of the FRX that typically I don't want to be in there. And it's usually done without my knowledge. There is a quirk even in VFP9 service pack 2 hotfix to the 9s. There's still a bug that will occasionally put the current printer that you have on your machine into the FRX, which will wreak havoc when you try to run it in a production environment when your customers don't have that same printer or like printer. Set path to project. When I open up projects, I set paths to all the files that are in the project so I can quickly get to them and run things standalone. Column listing is a replacement for the data listing capabilities in Visual FoxPro, and then the project builder builds projects. Let's take a look at a couple of these if we have time. And we got a couple minutes. Okay, so occasionally we run into corrupt data. If you have not, you're very lucky. If you are not having data corruption, your customers have perfectly great networks and all that. And I applaud you for having good customers like that. We do not always have customers who are nice, don't have good networks, and occasionally have customers who think shutting off their computer while a program's doing a table update, even though they don't know what that means, corrupts tables, and that is not fun. So I have my data checker. It prompts you for a folder. You can navigate to a different folder if you want. It looks for a DBC in it. If there's more than one DBC, it'll prompt you to pick which DBC you want to double check. Validates the database, goes through and opens up all the tables. If you have DBCX Stonefield data, it will also go through the Stonefield data and check for free tables as well. The nice thing about this is this gives me just an overview of what's going on. So immediately when I see this DBC, I see that the DBCX, the DBC index file is inflated beyond any reasonable amount, not to mention the DBC. In this case, we should be around a meg for the DBC. And then when we do the validate database, we see all kinds of problems with the DBC. That bloated DBC was going to pretty much guarantee that we were going to have index problems throughout the table. Once we get past all these, and this is, by the way, real customer data that we came across that had to be fixed because they didn't have a backup. And then it goes through and opens up each table, lets you know if it was successful or not, tells you where it is, the last date, time it was updated, how many records were in it, and then it tells you how many tags you have. And it just gives you a sense of, does it have an empty table? Well, does that make sense? Do we need empty tables? If we have an empty table, maybe that's a problem, and so on. And at the very end, it gives me a listing of telling me that it's pretty able to open up the table successfully or not. So anyways, that's just one utility that I wrote. Really, it took a long time, over years, to refine this tool, but I use this tool multiple times a month with real customer data. Right. I don't have time to show the rest, unfortunately. Again, the tools are available. The white paper points you to where you can download the tools that I've made available. I encourage everyone to do the same with the tools that they create. Things I find indispensable. You've seen Beautify X. You saw Create Locals. Intellisense X is an extension created by originally by Christoph, incorporated into Thor by Jim Nelson. Go-to definition I demonstrated. Superbuzz schema I demonstrated. M.A demonstrated. The set object size and position is a replacement for the alignment toolbar that you have in Visual FoxPro. If there's anything other than key chords that I keep forgetting about, it is that tool. I wish there was a MenuHits style replacement for toolbars in Visual FoxPro so that we could do the same thing to replace the native dialogues. If we could replace the native toolbars, this would be one of the candidates for that. The indispensable shortcuts to GoFish, PEM Editor, Finder, Project Explorer, Fox Unit, and a handful of other tools that are included with Thor in the Thor repository that I use all the time. Resources. Okay, this session, when I rehearsed it the first time a month ago, was pushed over 2 hours. So you have to do homework if you want to get everything out of this session. You have to read the white paper. It's got plenty of pictures, so it's 70 pages of information, but it's not 70 pages of single lines of text to read. I encourage you to, if you want more details, definitely read the white paper. There is a Google group called Thor, the Tool Manager for FoxPro. It's not super active, but it's fairly active, where people are posting questions. Some people struggle with getting Thor installed. There's some help for that in there. It really is a good group of people. It's a nice, easy way to get ideas channeled into the community as far as other tools that can be built, what you're doing with Thor, those kinds of things. And it'll just bring emails. You can go into the Thor group, or it'll bring emails into your into email for you too. The VFP.org, which points to GitHub, has all the Thor documentation and has all the Thor source code that you can download and install. It has the Thor repository as well that you can go and get and install. There are 4 chapters written by Jim Nelson that may, and I'm saying this knowing that there's a ton of great stuff in this book, but those 4 chapters definitely are some of the top chapters in the VFPX book. Tamar has done a couple of sessions on Thor. Her white papers are up on the Tomorrow Solutions website. They're great resources, great white papers. They were great sessions when she gave them. Jim did a session on why Thor. I'll be adding his white paper from that session to my downloads for this session, and I will get all the tools. Well, the tools are updated. They're on the Thor repository that I have, but any other samples that I have, I'll put up on the downloads as well. Please remember that everything you see is free. Doesn't cost you anything. Just time to download, try it out, run things, use things, benefit from things. The Thor Updater has some work that needs to be done. And it's not trivial work, but it's not hard work. It just needs time that somebody has, that the current people who do a lot of work on VFPX just don't have the bandwidth to do. Thor Updater needs some work to point to GitHub instead of Codeplex. If you are interested in doing that, reach out to myself or Doug, and we'll get you the instructions on how to do that. In summary, we went in, exposed some of Thor. Maybe you've seen, maybe you haven't. Hopefully, if you've seen Thor and you're using Thor, maybe we surface some memories of some foundation that you don't know about or didn't remember. I demoed as much as I had in time allowed. 75 minutes isn't justice for this session, unfortunately. Hopefully, I inspired you to write some tools in Thor for yourself. And if so, if they're good enough to drop them into the Thor repository, I really encourage you to get involved. Thank you very much for attending this session. Please fill out your evaluations. My name is Rick Schumer. This is my email address. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send them to me, and I'll be in the Q&A session right after this one. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.